Second roll calls, 1963. Roll call votes revealed that the 88th Congress, midway in its first session, was still delaying Kennedy's legislative program. Major legislation passed by one House of Congress was still pending in the other House, such as the Mental Facilities Act, Export-Import Bank Extension, Area Redevelopment, and so on. This inaction of Congress had liberals crying in despair, but constitutional conservatives rejoiced, because practically all bills on which Congress was slow to act were bills which never should have been considered by Congress in the first place. In short, midway in its first session, the 88th Congress, in the eyes of constitutional conservatives, was still the best Congress in a long time because it was stalling unconstitutional legislation and thus slowing down the socialist revolution. That is a summary of my report on Second Roll Calls 1963. The full report after a message from my sponsor. In July 1963, Walter Lippmann was complaining that the 88th Congress was sick, paralyzed, unable to act, because it had failed to enact any of President Kennedy's major legislative program. Walter Lippmann, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, is an idle high priest and spokesman of left-wing intellectuals who want a dictatorship of the elite in this country. Hence, his criticism of the Congress for slowing down the Kennedy legislative program is encouraging proof that the present Congress is showing some respect for the Constitution and is, thus, checking our headlong drive toward a socialist dictatorship. In the report on which this broadcast is based, I tabulate the actual votes of all United States senators and representatives on important measures. Midway in its first session, that is, by midsummer 1963, on the basis of 13 Senate roll calls and 12 House roll calls, which I have tabulated, the present Congress looks better than many in the past, although it is far from being the Congress we need. On roll calls which I have tabulated, no United States Senator has a 100% constitutionalist voting record. Only one Senator, Barry Goldwater, has 90% or better. Only 15 senators have a constitutionalist voting score of 70% or better, and of these 15, 10 are Republicans. In the House, 29 representatives have voted 100% constitutionalist, and 162 have a rating of 70% or better. Note some of the issues involved in the roll call votes which produced these ratings for the National Congress. Both Senate and House approved legislation extending Kennedy's feed grains program for 2 more years. This program, giving government control of the feed grains industry, is a backdoor approach to government control of the livestock industry. Both Senate and House approved legislation to eliminate silver backing for $1 and $2 bills, replacing them with Federal Reserve notes which are supposed to have a fractional gold backing. This will cause a heavier drain on our monetary gold reserve, already more than totally mortgaged to foreigners. The Senate has approved Kennedy's Mental Facilities Act of 1963, authorizing $848,500,000 for a 10-year program of federal subsidies to private, state, and private institutions for mental health research and education and for treatment centers for mental patients. The House has not yet approved the Mental Facilities Act. The 10th Amendment prohibits the federal government from exercising powers not delegated to it by the Constitution. The Constitution delegates no power to the federal government to finance mental facilities for private, state, or public institutions. Hence, the bill, if ever approved by the House, will violate the Constitution. Both Senate and House approved another temporary raising of the national debt limit to $309 billion. Strong opposition, especially in the House, to this kind of fiscal irresponsibility and deep resentment of Kennedy administration pressure techniques indicate that the President may have difficulty in the future in getting additional raises in the debt limit. The Senate approved the bill to double appropriations for the Disarmament Agency, but the House has not yet approved, and in the House there is strong opposition to the agency. Both Senate and House have approved another 5-year extension of the Export-Import Bank, but the two houses disagree on details, and the extension has not yet become law. Ever since it was established 28 years ago, the Export-Import Bank has been authorized to borrow up to $6 billion from the United States Treasury without any act of appropriation by Congress, although the Constitution provides that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. The House wants to stop this unconstitutional backdoor financing of the Export-Import Bank. The Senate wants to extend and enlarge the backdoor spending. If House and Senate cannot compromise their wide difference on this point, the Export-Import Bank will go out of existence. That would be a blessing. It would close at least one gaping hole through which our tax money pours for unconstitutional and harmful purposes. The Senate has approved a bill to authorize $455,500,000 for extension and expansion of the Area Redevelopment Program, an unconstitutional program of federal aid to states and communities initiated by Kennedy in 1961. The House rejected its own version of this bill and has not yet approved the Senate version. If the House refuses, it will confer another great blessing on the nation because the Area Redevelopment Program, being unconstitutional and harmful, should be abolished. Both Senate and House approved appropriations of $1,467,000,000 to pay for various federal agencies expenditures during fiscal 1963 in excess of what was budgeted for those agencies. When federal agencies can thus spend more than authorized and then get supplemental appropriations to meet their illegal deficits, budget cutting and congressional control of spending become farcical. The need for some of the expenditures involved can be illustrated by a Terrell, Texas story. The Terrell school system wanted federal money for a new auditorium. U.S. Representative Ray Roberts talked to U.S. Labor Department officials who conducted an unemployment survey and declared Terrell a depressed area entitled to Accelerated Public Works funds. The Accelerated Public Works program is among those requiring supplemental appropriations because more was spent than authorized in 1963. Well, Terrell, Texas is enjoying booming prosperity. Its citizens were outraged when they found out that Terrell had been declared a depressed area. Meanwhile, school officials had decided they did not want federal money for the auditorium after all. But once the wheels of bureaucracy start moving, they cannot be stopped. Apparently, the Labor Department cannot unclassify Terrell as a depressed area unless Terrell takes Accelerated Public Works funds. Adam Clayton Powell is a U.S. representative from New York, Democrat, and also pastor of the largest Negro church in the world, Baptist. Powell is notorious for his associations with more than 100 communist and communist front activities, and for his tours of foreign nightclubs at taxpayers' expense with his secretaries. On May 14, 1963, the House refused to appropriate money to send Powell and others to a conference of the International Labor Organization in Geneva. The State Department thereupon announced that it would use its tax money to send Powell to Geneva. Not to be outdone, the House, on May 29, authorized money for Powell's trip. On June 4, 1963, the House amended the Reorganization Act of 1949 to prohibit the President from creating new executive departments by merely reorganizing the executive establishment. Eisenhower created the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in 1953 by this means. And Kennedy has been trying to create a new Department of Urban Affairs by the same means. This measure is pending in the Senate. If the Senate approves, President Kennedy can then, by executive action, create a Department of Urban Affairs, which he has been wanting and which Congress has been refusing for 2 years. You ought to find out how your U.S. representative and your 2 United States senators vote in Congress on such measures as these. All who order copies of this broadcast will get brief reviews of major issues like these and the exact tabulation on how all representatives and senators voted on them. Study the voting records of your elected representatives. Support those who vote for constitutional principles regardless of party. Oppose those who do not. By this means, you will do your part toward getting a United States Congress composed of men who understand and honor the Constitution, and who will thus stop our disastrous race toward a total socialist dictatorship. In this connection, I call your attention to an eloquent warning sounded in the United States Senate more than a half a century ago. On March 27, 1878, Senator Benjamin Harvey Hill, addressing the Senate, said, quote, "I have said I do not dread industrial corporations as instruments of power to destroy this country, because there are thousands of agencies which can regulate, restrain, and control corporations. But there is a corporation we may all well dread. That corporation is the federal government. From the aggressions of this corporation there can be no safety if it is allowed to go beyond the well-defined limits of its power. I dread nothing so much as the exercise of ungranted and doubtful powers by this government. It is, in my opinion, the danger of dangers to the future of this country. Let us be sure to keep it always within its limits. If this great, ambitious, ever-growing corporation of the federal government becomes oppressive, who shall check it? If it become wayward, who shall control it? If it become unjust, who shall trust it? As sentinels on the country's watchtower, Senators, I beseech you, watch and guard with sleepless dread that corporation which can make all property and rights, all states and people, and all liberty and hope its playthings in an hour and its victims forever." End quote. Goodbye. God bless you. For a printed copy of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 419. Second roll calls, 1963. 6 copies, $1.